I, especially as a teenager, struggled with this a lot. And like the rhetoric was very much like, you're never going to get a real job. You'll never be able to function as an adult. You need to grow up. You need to be mature. And feeling very lost and confused in my own body, like I'm trying. Okay, hi everybody. Thanks for coming back if you've been here before, or hi, welcome if you're new. My name is Mickey. I'm a therapist, and we talk about therapy things on this channel. Today, we're talking about ADHD again. Y'all love when I make these videos, and I have wicked ADHD and also find it an interest or in a particular area of interest for me in terms of looking at research about neurodivergent brains. So we're talking about it again today because I've got some surprising ADHD symptoms that I think people should really talk about more. I think the discussion about ADHD really centers around like hyperactivity and like, oh, you don't remember things or, stuff like that, which are very much debilitating symptoms of the disorder, to be clear. But there are other things that I think can go under the radar that it's useful to do some education about. Before we do that, I want to be super clear that all of the information in this video is intended to be broad strokes, education and learning. This is not therapy. It can't be therapy. And also, this is not a diagnosis. This is not diagnostic criteria. There is very specific diagnostic criteria, but it's important that an actual human being does that with you specifically while having a very in-depth conversation about your particular experience. So I want to be super clear. If you resonate with any of these symptoms, there are always links in my description for you to go find a therapist of your very own who can help you walk through the diagnosis process, but I'm not that person and I can't do that. So we're just talking about it today. Again, broad strokes, education, and learning. That said, let's talk about some of these surprising symptoms that I think we should talk about more. First thing I want to talk about is auditory processing disorders. This is one of the ones that I think is getting a little bit more discussion these days, especially on TikTok and other places where neurodivergent people seem to flock to. But auditory processing disorder is interesting because it is a separate diagnosis in and of itself. If you are neurodivergent, you can have an auditory processing disorder, but if you're neurotypical, you can also have an auditory processing disorder. And you can have like one or the other or both. It's not like a symptom so much as it is a disorder in its own right, but it is commonly co-occurring with ADHD and like neurodivergency. For those of you who don't know, auditory processing disorders can look a lot of different ways. Commonly, it's when words don't really make sense to you or you have a hard time comprehending things that are being spoken to you, especially in an overstimulating environment, or if you have a sensitivity to particular noises. So auditory processing disorder can show up for people a lot in like crowded public spaces, like crowds, for example. As a child and as a teenager, I did not understand why I would have panic attacks in public, surrounded by lots of people when someone was trying to talk to me. And I know now it's because I have an auditory processing disorder that makes it really difficult for me to process information when there's lots of stimuli happening. And so this is what that can look like. If you notice for yourself that you get really irritated or agitated or overwhelmed or you shut down in situations where there's too much auditory noise happening, this might be why. It can also, like I mentioned, be that you have a hard time with verbal comprehension. These are the people that, for example, if somebody writes something down for you, like instructions, you can follow that pretty easily. But if somebody verbally tells you, hey, I need you to go into this room, past this doorway, grab this thing out of a box, and then bring this back here and put it on a purple pillow, that you're like, I don't know, like I can't remember any of those things that you just said. That could very well be part of auditory processing disorder. Again, I want to be super clear that there is a whole world of nuance here, but for what it's worth, if you resonate with any of these things, again, might be worth doing some further exploration about that, because figuring out a workaround for how to deal with that can go a really long way in making your lived experience a whole lot more comfortable. Oh, also, before we do the next step, I want to be clear, all of the links for the research for this video is going to be in the description. So if you want further nuance, explanation, all of that stuff, links in the description, as always. Okay, before we talk about this next tip, I want to pause and say thank you to this week's sponsor, which is Adam and Eve. I'm so excited to work with Adam and Eve again because we've worked with them before and had such a wonderful experience, and they have been so kind as to give me a special discount code for all of my followers. So if you go to adamandeve.com and you use code Mickey at checkout, you can get 50% off one item plus free shipping in the United States and Canada. I also love that Adam and Eve has discreet shipping and 90-day no-hassle returns. So go use code Mickey at checkout at adamandeve.com, get your 50% off one item plus free shipping in the United States and Canada. And thank you again to Adam and Eve for sponsoring this week's video. Let's go ahead and hop back in. The next thing that I want to talk about is working memory issues. Working memory is a part of this umbrella of executive functioning. It's very common for people with ADHD and neurodivergency generally to have executive functioning issues. This can look a whole host of ways. This video is not about that. We don't have time to get into all of that. But part of executive functioning is working memory. A lot of people will explain working memory as almost like a mental workspace. The way that I find it helpful to view this in an example is like trying to calculate the tip on your bill at a restaurant inside of your mind. There's almost this like work desk that's there. And I know that not everybody visualizes things in their head. I'm not saying it's like actually the picture of a work desk, but like there is a sort of mental process that takes place where your brain is trying to work out, if my bill is $35.27, 20% of that is this. And so then this amount gets added to my total bill, and that makes my total bill with tip this amount of money. That whole process is utilizing your working memory. People with ADHD can have a really hard time with this because our attention span is really short, and also because our working memory is sometimes an area of deficit for us. It's just the way that the neurodivergent brain is structured sometimes. And so if you notice that you have a hard time with that, it's not because you're dumb. It's not because you don't care, because you're not trying hard enough. It might be that you have some dysfunction with your working memory. And again, there's very real tips and like interventions that can take place that a therapist can help you with that, again, can serve as sort of a workaround here. But I think knowing that this is a thing and being destigmatized, being normalized that people will struggle with this is really important. Okay, the third thing that I want to talk about is called restraint collapse. There has been actually a lot of discussion about this as it relates to small children, but I want to talk about it in regards to adults also, because restraint collapse refers to essentially having a meltdown after trying to like hold it together all day. Especially for people with hyperactivity, this can look like suppressing hyperactivity all day while you're at school or while you're at work. And then when you get home, either shutting down or having like a burst of hyperactivity that's really disjointed and a little bit overwhelming. This is happening because in order to fit into a neurotypical world, neurodivergent people oftentimes have to suppress that part of themselves in order to not draw negative attention or to be chastised in school, for example. And so this is a common cause of meltdowns, of tantrums in little kids when they get home from school. A lot of parents who are neurotypical with neurodivergent children will struggle with this because the feeling is like, why are you good for your teachers, but you're like taking it out on me when you get home? And it's because children who know that school is not the place or that you'll get in trouble for being yourself feel safe with their primary caregivers. And so then they sort of let this mask slip and start to have this meltdown. If you notice this for yourself in your adult life, I really, really want to validate this. There's a lot of shame and stigma around this as being like, oh, I'm not a grown up or I'm not an adult or like I can't be functional. And I think it's just important that we acknowledge that the cause of restraint collapse is ultimately being treated as like a second-class citizen, as a neurodivergent person in the workplace, in social situations, and in like neurotypical centric places. So if you experience this, I think being aware of it and also providing yourself with some care and compassion around this can go a long way. And also exploring like in these moments where we're having a restraint collapse, what is it that's happening for us, right? Like what's coming up? What do we need? Doing some really conscious exploration about changes that we can make and like things that we can provide ourselves in terms of practical or internal support is going to be really, really key here. Oh, also I wanted to note that this can be dysregulation in the form of meltdowns or acting out, especially for little kids, like tantrums and things like that. But it can also take the form of shutting down. So if you notice that you need time to like stare into the void after like a long work day or being around a lot of people, if you notice that you need time to like be especially chaotic or disjointed or, linear in your choices and actions, that can also be part of restraint collapse. Okay, let's talk about speech disorders. This one is like near and dear to my heart because still to this day, besides the people who hate me because I'm fat, the comments about how fast I talk are like the number one hate comment that I get on this channel. And this is why speech disorders are very common for neurodivergent people, especially ADHD people. If you are a person who talks really fast or a person whose mouth can't keep up with your brain, this might be why. Speech disorders are oftentimes a symptom of our brain processing and computing things in a way that's not compatible with our physical selves. And so like for me, for example, this comes up a lot with stuttering, with mixing words together. Almost all of the outtakes, besides me burping, are me mixing words together that don't make any sense and having to retake the thing because it doesn't it wasn't what I was trying to say. So if you notice that this is happening for you, be kind to yourself about it. It can feel really embarrassing to be like, why can't I just fucking talk effectively? But it's not your fault. It's likely because your brain is just doing stuff in a way that's not compatible with how quickly we can, speak out loud. Along with this though, it can also be repeating words and phrases. So if you are a person who notices that like you take on other people's accents, for example, when you're around them for too long, or if you have vocal stims, words that you latch onto, phrases that you latch onto. Erin just gave me a look off camera. This is very much a thing that we do also, where we just find a word and like little parrots, we just say it around our house. This is a common symptom of that. Also, the functional impact of this is slightly less, at least with the vocal stems, but with the speech disorders and stumbling over your words, again, it can feel very shameful and very embarrassing. I want to be super clear. It's not a shameful or embarrassing thing. It's just part of being a neurodivergent person sometimes, and that's okay. So there are lots of interventions that you can use to try to alleviate the symptom, but that's not really the point of this video. I mostly just want to encourage people in recognizing that, like, A, this is a real issue, and B, you are, exceedingly common. Like, this is a really common issue for neurodivergent people. Okay, the last thing that I want to talk about is sleep disorders. This is probably one of the other ones that I think is gaining a lot of traction in terms of public discourse. However, I want to talk about it because there are a lot of different types of sleep disorders that can commonly co-occur with ADHD. This is similar to the auditory processing disorder thing that we talked about at the top of the video, in the sense that you can have ADHD or a sleep disorder or both. It's a Venn diagram is what I'm saying. Not all people who have ADHD or a neurodivergency will have a sleep disorder, and not all people who have a sleep disorder have ADHD. You get it. Like I said, there's a lot of different types of sleep disorders for the purpose of creating a few examples, one of which is delayed sleep phase disorder. This is essentially where your daytime or your sleep routine is like just shifted a few hours. So this is probably one of the more common ones that ADHD people experience, where you have a really hard time waking up early in the morning. Ideally, your day starts somewhere between like 10 and noon, and your bedtime is later than most people. So you're going to sleep somewhere between like 11 and 1 a.m. roughly. It's just an example to be super clear, but this is oftentimes labeled as like bedtime or sleep revenge. Those of us who have like inner child work that we're still trying to do, it can very much be the thing where like I feel like I didn't get free time in my day to do the things that I wanted to do, so I'm like taking revenge on that by like doing all of my fun stuff at nighttime and therefore going to bed later. And to be clear, it could be that. Sometimes it's that, sometimes it's both. But this can also just be part of a neurodivergency, like a co-occurring issue, where our brains are just wired to be awake later and to wake up later. So if you notice this happening for you, again, there's a lot of stigma and shame thrown around about this topic. I, especially as a teenager, struggled with this a lot. And like the rhetoric was very much like, you're never going to get a real job. You'll never be able to function as an adult. You need to grow up. You need to be mature. And feeling very lost and confused in my own body, like I'm fucking trying. Like I can't wake up early. If you find this happening for you, please know it's not because you're lazy. It's not because you're not trying hard enough or because you're immature, not a grown-up. This is a very real issue that people struggle with. Also, honorable mention for obstructive sleep apnea and daytime sleepiness. Again, this is the Venn diagram thing. People can have it. You get it. But I think the daytime sleepiness is also really important to talk about here. I'm assuming that everybody knows what sleep apnea is. If you don't know what sleep apnea, just as a brief explanation, you basically stop breathing. When you're sleeping and you wake up gasping for air, that's not so much a behavioral thing. It can be a contributor for excessive daytime sleepiness. I'm not a medical doctor, so I'm not really going to speak to obstructive sleep apnea. However, daytime sleepiness is very much a thing that happens for people with ADHD. And this is something that I can speak to as a clinician because ADHD has been, or the ADHD brain has been described as an interest-based nervous system. I don't know why I did 3 quotes instead of 2, but interest-based nervous system. Essentially meaning that when our ADHD brain is not receiving the input or the stimulus that we are ideally looking for, we shut down. This is why for a lot of people with ADHD, stimulant-based medication stimulation is a really effective intervention because it helps to combat this sleepiness that happens where, like, if you're on a Zoom call that's really boring, you start to fall asleep. And it's not because you're lazy. It's not because you didn't get enough sleep last night. I mean, it might be, but it's not because you didn't get enough sleep last night. It's because your nervous system is wired to only function when you have continual new input and stimulus. So when we have to do boring ass shit like meetings that could have been an email, our brain is like, no, we're not doing that. So you start to power down. One of the most effective ways that we can deal with this is to provide our brain with some kind of input or stimulus. This is why, for example, fidget toys, little like stimmy things are really helpful for ADHD or neurodivergent people, is because it helps to provide our brain with something to think about or do when we have to sit through boring drudgery or like long drawn out tasks or monotonous tasks also. Again, I just want to note this because it oftentimes is conceptualized as like being rude or like you should just go to sleep earlier. Like this is not a thing that you should struggle with. And it's very much a normal or like common issue to have. It's not to say that there's not work you can do around it because there very much is. Again, I'll always plug the links in my description to get specific help for you around this issue. But I want to normalize this as a thing that lots of people struggle with and that it's not reflective of like ill moral repute. You know, it's a brain thing. You can't help it. And that's okay. You're worthy of love and compassion around that. And again, there's lots of really useful resources that can be impactful in combating this issue. God, I feel like I waved my arms around so much in this video. As always, the links for all of these, the research that I have will be in the description if you guys want further information about it. Generally speaking, if you're a neurodivergent friend, please practice being kind to yourself. Being neurodivergent can be kind of difficult and frustrating, especially in a world that wants to try to force us to be neurotypical. So practice, compassion and kindness for yourself. And also just know that there's a whole bunch of us out there. There's lots of us who are just like you. You're not alone in this. And there's very much, like I said, like meaningful, impactful resources that can make a difference in your life. So if you're working through neurodivergency, big love to you. It's really fun sometimes. It is really hard other times. So like I said, there's lots of us. We see you. You're very valid and seen. If you guys like the video, subscribe to the channel. We do talk about stuff like this. And we also do a pop culture moment. So I'd love to have you stay for that. And then share the video to help the channel grow and to help each other grow. And I will see you guys next Saturday. Okay, bye.